The onliners in their native lands, especially Australia. Melanie and Jennifer live in a U.S. satellite, a land of mist and not driving right, called England, Mel having been born there as the loving goddess somewhere on the sacred Isle of Women. Then taking off with Antonia swimming, and Jacy, a woodcutter's fine daughter, guards the border with her wonderful laughter, her thoughts on the loose, gone through the rafters. In that country, left is whatever is right, leaving right to be whatever is left. Right? When I went over there to see her, I always had to use a mirror. Melanie uses both brain hemispheres, mostly in the pursuit of achieving there. The brainless bliss of nothingness, as of the brayman's dreaminess. England's not as bad as Ravs, Jam Timeses, Leos, Lomaxes, Piters, Greybeards, and Tina's upside-down provincial dominion, Extrema, of the Mars-like planet of Australia, which has a bunch of dry, dusty towns, where they say what's going down each day, instead of what's up. But either way, the answer is always an elevator or a lift. A foreign lady at a hotel once asked me for a lift, so I picked her up and carried her, quite miffed, all the way to her room as a welcoming gift. I flew down under to Australia only once, on assignment with Bill Bryson's Penal Sentence. Australia is mostly an empty thraldom, much more vacant than even an atom, and is extremely far away from anywhere else. It has less people than Tokyo, but is a zillion times more extremo. The constellations are the inverse, and the seasons run in reverse. It has nothing of any interest, and the climate is the cruelest. It is the only country that is also a continent, that is also the world's largest island extent, and the only one begun as a prison meant. Greybeard must have a lot of original sin, because all of his ancestors were his criminal kin. The cities are all on the coast, since the interior place is an endless desert about half the size of outer space. Somebody once set off an atomic bomb in the Great Victoria Desert's silent calm in Western Australia, a land much embalmed, but no one noticed it for years. That maelstrom, but for creatures jumping right out of the genome. Of the world's 10 most poisonous snakes, most are Australian, for Christ's and God's sakes. Even a fluffy caterpillar can kill you. Seashells are venomous too. Adieu and skidoo to you. Every ocean current carries you far out to sea. They even lost a prime minister, Harold Holt, see, who was merely strolling along the beach. He stepped into the surf, going swiftly out of reach, and was never seen or heard from again. Imbeached. Australia is very old, and nothing has changed there for 60 million years, nor anything rearranged. Thus one may find there the oldest fossils on Earth. Even the first faint signs of life can be seen. Its birth, and the earliest animal tracks ever made. No dearth. It seems, though, that its creatures evolved outside of Darwin's book, being quite convolved. They don't run at all, but just bounce across the landscape, like a ball, or they jounce. Australia is the driest, hottest, most useless, infertile, flattest, and climatically unbalanced of all the continents instanced. It is so hot there that recently, amen, the air caught on fire once again. The place is so inert that even the soil is a fossil. Even the worms and bacteria are quite docile. On the upside, they have 20% of the world's slot machines present to serve less than 1% of the world's population extent. As about equal to finding a live T-Rex, proto-ants were found alive there, having sex, although nothing like them had existed on Earth for over 100 million years worth. So does Greybeard know his evolutionary stuff? Or what? Yes, indeed, plus all of those ants so tough were found on his back porch, hell-bent with intent. They've now become extinct due to his experiments. I flew to Los Angeles from Australia, getting there in time and date, even before I left the shore, which was hardly soon enough for me. Let us all say a prayer for poor Greybeard to be. The science news is that NASA is feverishly pursuing the manned Mars landing plan. Flyers ever wooing, but still needs some suitable astronauts, so it's off to White Cliffs, Australia for some kumquats. Here they found a population of about 80 in a wilted world of heat, rocks, and dust. Matey. Due to the horrible heat, their cave houses are burrowed into the hills. For souses and mouses, when a vehicle goes by, it raises a big cloud of red dust that eventually settles in shrouds and covers everything in sight, leaving nothing to see. They've had electricity only since 1993, TV since 1998, but no channels yet to espy. Taipan snakes slither by on the sly, their venom 50 times more poisonous than a cobra's, to leave you breathless. Australia began as a nation that was thrust when convicts actually began wanting so much to go there for the crazy gold rush. So anyway, NASA enlisted them all in the Mars landing program's shortfall, figuring that they wouldn't really know the diff between the planet Mars and White Cliffs, or that if they ever did, they'd be so spaced, happy to reside in a more hospitable place. Science saves us from the warm future. The White Cliffs underground motel moochers and those of the various home residences picked have the right idea to avoid the warming conflict. Free cooling to 67 degrees. F. Perfect. This may be a good plan for all of the future deal, if global warming really happens to happen for real. I can imagine a stay in the dugout motel, unraveling, it being quite a heavenly destination after traveling forever, going over bumpy roads, and then getting out of the blender mode and into the pool. Wetting, as all this traveling would grant more appreciation of the 3-starred 8AA motel's accommodations. Coming, sweetie? Just you and me. Our room would have natural light from a shaft, which saves on electricity, oil, and gas. There are no windows, but that only saves us from having to view the non-scenery, a plus. Cell phones wouldn't work, but hey, happy endings. Then for those blendings, never tending, there would be no interruptions of any pending eruptions. Hey, how come people in soap operas always answer their darn phone? Sagas? It always ruins the moment's erotica. Plus, we could always dine in the restaurant, since the nearest supermarket is a scant and rough 6-mile drive away. Ask Aunt. And those dust-assisted sunsets are of truly unbeatable descents, they having 10 times as more colors than the rainbow. 40. Plus, with White Cliffs having electricity now, the beer tastes no longer like a steamy hot cow, at 110 degrees F, but ice cold for highbrows. There was a bad drought in the 1890s here, and the land has not recovered, oh dear. But who needs that when one has love and cold beer? And now of others whom I met online, gently roasted here with rhythm and rhyme. In Fred's pyramidal world, it is that the origin of the belly button of the universe was an inner begin that reached the limit of being really small, and so it popped back out to become the outer all, as in the outer space of the entire universe around, that formed from the unlimited merry-go-round. Mohan wrote many multi-verses of poems on the steamy planet of India, per diem, where they have 3 million gods become. They will eventually be getting more, so that each person can have one to adore. One day the temperature there went down to 75 degrees F, which would be a perfect markdown anywhere else. But here they all tried to look for sweaters to put on outside, but they didn't own any, at least not very many. In the summer, on and in the icy planetoid called the Yukon, a frozen place that's best to avoid, Label Wench worked only at night, but like the day it was just as bright. The sun never rose, staying up all the more, for it had never set during the day before. When a cloud came by in its starkness, they called it night or darkness and had to use flashlights until it passed, so that they could all find their wine glasses. They have only 2 days a year there, each 6 months long and longer, called white and black or bright and pitch black. MJA lives in a land where there was no difference in anything, for all was equal. Everyone was a clone, wearing the same clothes. The sports results were always ties, so close. Everyone got an A in school, for they couldn't measure the rule. But they'd all progressed beyond this equality, thanks to Bottomlander, who lives in a valley. Antonio lives in the celestial body of Mexico, but for some reason they call it Texas, since long ago. The U.S. stole it away. We would give it all back, but for the fact that they have already taken it, Jack. I always try to say, remember the start, but I usually can't recall the Alamo part. One time I got a letter for my laxes for Austin on taxes from Austin, Texas, and I didn't know what to do but axe it. In Greenbug's asteroid of Greenland, every single thing was green, and so after a while this gave him the blues, after which valley of depression's dews, He then felt very much in the pink, and much on the uprise until all was a rosy think. Then he discovered that he had been given green contact lenses at birth, these being riven. His land was really all white. The green in the land names right, being only part of an advertising plan, to get people to settle the land. Thereafter, not so many came to Iceland. Bogey resides in the sunken land of Florida, where the year-round heat is all too horrible, where old people walk really slow in front of you towards God's waiting room to the very last pew. Bogey cools his thoughts in the arena of Tampa Bay, pondering every idea that comes his way. Rascal Puff lives in Niihau, Hawaii, a secret place, so that's all can say I. Graham lives in the Canadian clouds where all is allowed, in a levitated home, smoking pot homegrown. Felix lives in Schrodinger's cat house shed, but only half the time when he's not dead. Lloyd lives in the real house of science, so please let all posts there be in compliance. Lesky's leaving the new land of zeal, ever becoming more and more real. Max lives in the U.S. in the state of deep thought, with all his relatives, many of whom were fought, cousins twice removed, but they kept on coming back. Melanie says that nothing is real, and this reminds me of Guy whose spiel related that nothing is true, for real. Everyone believed him for 20 million years, but then they found out he was lying. Oh, tears. And so it was then so sure that they truly knew that the case was really that nothing was true. And so for 15 million more years of bluffing, they believed not anything and nothing. So what was this guy's name? Well, it was the man with no name, which was nobody nowhere, who was now here but nowhere. He lived in the no place of virtual space. Then a large but tiny problem was found with nothing, that there was a slight ado about it, surely. This being the quantum uncertainty, not a very big deal really, being the smallest thing of reality, but enough to raise it to be a near nothing, just about as close to nothing as one could ever get without stuffings. And so it hardly really counted for much, but it made for a universe in which, as a crutch, the gravitational energy was negative, it canceling out the positive, all the energy of stuff, but for the unavoidable touch of the quantum uncertainty, which we can almost certainly avoid for all practices, purposely. So nothing is true and nothing is real. Turned out to be pretty much right, a done deal, except in England, where it was all that was left, reality bereft, a cleft from the theft that was deft. Meanwhile, Mel shivered with the quantum jitters, turning it into a jazz dance of some random twitters. Now what about nothing is real, employing it in the sense that the real doesn't even exist, although it has a feel? Well, something does exist, so we might rather say that nothing persists, and so everything is temporary, but being, since our realism came from a near nothing. And to such it must return in great arrears, even if that takes about 10 years. Prof. Pat is expanding into the void, accounting for the Catholic girls' heavenly student bodies more, and lives in the naturally divided state of Michigan, that unmarried state which is separated by a long fat lake, a further segregation being that the upper part of the state associates with Canada, while the lower part is called Michiana. On the other side of the lake, the state is more or less a part of Wisconsin's fate. Up above, one time I drove from Chicago's exploit to New York by entering Canada, from Detroit into Windsor, near the Church of Prof. Pat. Adroit, by then getting out of Canada's shortfalls as soon as I could, at Viagra Falls, a fun place for vacationing foreigners to leave lots of money for souvenirs. When they say that the glaciers retreated, they only mean that they repleted and went back up into Canada, where they sit atop the forgotten land, in which few are cold because so many are frozen stiff. Since it is all ice, everyone plays hockey all day, at least when they can blowtorch the ice away from their iglooed cars, if the flames will stay. Canada has only one superhighway. It goes east and west all day, and as close to the U.S. as it possibly can. It doesn't even have railings, man, for there is nothing to run into if you go off the road by some miscue. So anyway, Canada is really only about a width of 10 miles. That is a barely habitable shout. Just above the U.S., a suburb, really, for fallout. They have only one baseball team. That is going nowhere, it would seem. Since they are really all hockey players extreme, the police still ride horses there on the loose. But this is actually a step up from a moose. Sears is their biggest industry, barely afloat, mostly selling really heavy fur coats, made from polar bear furs that were poached. Mikal works in men's clothes there. She drank Canada Dry in her time that was spare, but now drinks only ice water, right from her tap, being sober and serious and all that yap. All their restaurants are called Tim's Donuts. Canada is really even smaller than it looks, a rut, for a part of France called Quebec is in it, but is not really with it, they all being nuts. Every U.S. map I've ever seen ends at Canada, just showing it as a bit of a blank gray area, which probably is really the right scenario. When Henry Hudson discovered the frigid Hudson Bay, his men were so mad that they put him off one day. Mikal lives at the end of Long Lake, Ontario, a prime spot since it gets the extra lake effect snow of 2 feet more than the average of 5 feet or so. June is still a winter month there in that fen, but one only needs 2 coats to wear then. One time it got up to 80 degrees F there. On a midsummer's day, and everyone there became sweating and boiling, and so there they all ran around with naked eyes all bare. The power goes off more than it's on. The only place worse is Antarctica 1. Even the Yukon, which is really a secret part of Alaska, has better weather than Ontario's heart. So to help Mikal, let us apply some science in the form of some secret zapping rays of potence. From the North Pole's HAARP array that will melt all the ice and then